Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Authentic Networking. This session is brought to you by the American Diabetes Association's Focus on Fellows Early Career webinar series. Thank you to those who have attended our Focus on Fellows sessions last year. And for those of you that are new, we will be providing additional information on how you can join the Focus on Fellows program to get access to great sessions like this. My name is Stephanie Kim, and I will be moderating today's program. To share a little bit about myself, I graduated from Endocrine Fellowship in 2020, and I am a clinical assistant professor at the University of Washington with a special interest in diabetes. None of this would be possible without the guidance of ADA's Early Career Advisory Group. We would like to thank the members for all their hard work to develop today's program. We are also very grateful for the support of the Leona B and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust, who have made this meeting a possibility. Focus on Fellows offers a career development program for early career fellows who treat diabetes and its complications. We have several upcoming early career webinar sessions this spring, with our main program taking place on Friday, June 3rd at the ADA's 82nd Scientific Sessions in New Orleans. This event will be in person, so we encourage you to attend. Attendees who participate in the Focus on Fellows program will be eligible for complimentary registration to the 82nd Scientific Sessions and a free ADA professional membership. If you are not already a part of our Focus on Fellows program, we encourage you to join. Application deadline is May 2nd. Visit the website link in the chat for more information and to apply. By joining the Focus on Fellows program, you also become a professional member of the American Diabetes Association. This free ADA membership will provide even more opportunities to network and grow professionally. The ADA memberships include a variety of professional member benefits, including meeting discounts, Women's Interprofessional Network, or WIN ADA, interest groups, Diabetes Pro member forum, professional journals, members-only webinars, member directory, standards of medical care in diabetes, and Diabetes Pro Quarterly. As you can see, you will have access to lots of great resources as an ADA professional member. You will receive information about membership following today's session. Now we will transition to today's program. Please note that today's presentations will include Q&A. If you have questions as we move through the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box in your control panel. We'll be answering as many questions as we can at the end of the session. I now have the privilege of introducing Alan DeBack. Mr. DeBack is an experienced career coach and learning consultant with over 20 years of experience. With career coaching experience in a variety of environments, Alan has helped clients gain clarity about their career pathways and how to pursue them. His training practice has focused on the areas of communication skills, management, and leadership development, as well as career development. Alan has developed and facilitated training in management skills, presentation skills, meeting facilitation skills, as well as business writing skills. His clients include associations, corporations, federal government agencies, and healthcare organizations. Alan possesses a liberal arts undergraduate degree from the State University of New York College at Geneseo, a master's degree in human resource development from Rochester Institute of Technology, and a graduate certificate in industrial labor relations from Cornell University. Thank you, Mr. DeBack, for joining us today. I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, and thank you to ADA for sponsoring me this afternoon, and welcome to Authentic Networking. Just a little preface, thank you for that wonderful introduction, but just a little preface. In my work as a career coach, over time, I've just become really, really interested in the whole concept of networking and how networking can help not only in a job search, but also in terms of advancing your professional career. So I've been doing a lot of work with my clients in networking over the years. I've been doing a lot of research into networking and networking techniques. And I really feel like I've become somewhat of an expert in the field and have some tips and some strategies that I want to share with you this afternoon that I'm confident will really make you a better networker and will really enhance the quality of your career. I know many of you will be going to New Orleans on June 3rd. And how timely is this? This will be an opportunity when you're in New Orleans to use some of the strategies that we're going to talk about this afternoon and see how they work for you, kind of try them on for size and see how they work. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about how I became very, very interested in this particular topic. So let's start off by taking a look at the objectives for this afternoon. And I've established 4 basic objectives for the afternoon. Let's take a look at them. And here they are. First of all, we're going to talk about this concept of authentic networking, and I use that terminology for a very important reason. And we're going to talk about why it's important, not only for those of you who may be engaged in some sort of job search, but also throughout your professional career. Why is authentic networking so very important? We're going to discuss some of the basic strategies around networking and how to network. And we are going to delve into both traditional in-person networking as well as virtual networking, because both are incredibly important, particularly in this age of COVID. So we'll discuss both. We're also going to take a look at something called net worthing. We'll talk about traditional networking and a strategy called net worthing that I wish I could take responsibility for, but I can't. A colleague of mine really developed this net worthing strategy and the terminology several years ago. But I really want you to understand how important net worthing is as you go through this networking process. So we'll talk about that. And we also will talk about one of the very important tools around both net worthing and networking, and that is informational meetings. In the old days, we used to call them informational interviews. I've moved to calling them informational meetings now. And we'll talk about some strategies, some reasons why you should want to have informational meetings, and some strategies around scheduling and holding informational meetings. So that is where we will head as we go through the next hour or so. I'll stop about halfway through for any questions that come up. So if you have questions, please write them down. And we also will have a short Q&A session at the end of our hour or so together today. So that's where we're going to head. So to start off, I'd like to kind of establish a baseline, and I'd really like to find out how you all feel about professional networking. And so I have a question for you and a poll, and I'm going to ask the tech people to put the poll up in just a moment. There it is. I'd like to know how you feel about networking. And the choices range from I absolutely hate it, I feel like I'm using people, to it's a necessary evil, a little bit more positive, I can do it, I've made some decent connections. And then on the other end of the spectrum, absolutely love it, lots of great people and lots of great new ideas. So if you could go to the poll and just give me your feedback on how you feel about networking. And so when it looks like we have several people who have responded, let's put up the results. And here we go. So you should be able to see the results, and it looks like a small but substantial percentage really hate it. They feel like they're using people. I have some stories around that. It's a necessary evil. About a third of you said that. I'm part of that group. It's not my favorite thing in the world to do, but I can talk about it much better than do it. But I do have some strategies that will really help you with that. And about half of you said, I can do it. I've made some decent connections. And that's great. That's actually a very high percentage compared to what I sometimes get. Nobody in this group loves it. 0% love it. And that's understandable. I don't often get a lot of people who absolutely love it. So we have some people who are kind of neutral about it, a little bit positive, and some folks who don't feel terribly good about it. And that is not surprising. So thank you for responding to that poll. That really gives me kind of a baseline of where you all are coming from. And for those of you who said you hate networking, for those of you who feel like it's a necessary evil, That may be because networking has some negative connotations around it. The very word networking has some negative connotations. So I'd like to just get an idea, particularly from those of you who were not overly positive about the idea of networking. Why does it have negative connotations for you? If you could open the chat box and go to the chat box and share with everyone, why is it that networking does have negative connotations for you? And I'll give you a couple of moments to share your ideas in the chat box. While you're doing that, I'll tell you a very personal story, and it happens to be about my brother. He was involved in a scenario where his company laid off several people several years ago, and he was one of those who unfortunately lost his job. And he came to me for help with his job search because he knew that I'm a career coach. And he told me what he was doing. And what he was doing was basically an electronic search. He was sitting all day at his computer, responding to ads that he saw online by sending electronic resumes. And that was it. That was what he was doing for his job search. And I said to him, you really need to get out and see people. Have you thought about trying to do some networking? And his answer was so interesting. He said, no, I don't want to do that. I feel like that's using people. And for him, that very word had some really negative connotations. So get a couple of responses here to this question about why networking has negative connotations. Danielle says it can be hard to approach people. Boy, is that true. I happen to be a Myers-Briggs introvert, and so for me, that can be a challenge. And Priya says something very interesting. Priya says it can seem disingenuous. And that's a really interesting observation, and I think often a very accurate observation, because it can seem disingenuous. It can seem like it's just not a genuine approach. And that's why we're going to talk about something called authentic networking, because you really do want to seem sincere and you really do want to uphold the values that you may have. So very understandable that for some people, this does have some negative connotations. So I've titled this session Authentic Networking, and I have done that for a reason, because I do want this to correspond to people's values and correspond to their ethical standards and who they feel like they are. And so I called it Authentic Networking, and I called it authentic for a reason. And I thought it'd be interesting just to take a look at the meaning of authentic, because I like that term, but I really, when I created the program, I really didn't think about exactly what authentic means. So I thought, let's take a look at some definitions of authentic. So I went to several online dictionaries and looked at several definitions, and I found one I really like in, I believe it's dictionary.com. And here it is. I really like this. Representing one's true nature or beliefs, true to oneself or to the person identified. And so I like this idea of being true to yourself. I like the idea of being true to your beliefs, really reflecting the nature of who you are. And so this definition of authentic really, really resonates with me. And for networking to be authentic, you really have to be true to yourself. You really have to be true to the nature of who you are, to your beliefs, and to your values. All that's so incredibly important. So that's why the word authentic is so critical here. So let's get into talking a little bit about networking. And I have another question for you all. And I'd encourage everyone, please participate in these questions. The more responses we get, the better the information will be. And my question for you is this: why should I network? Very simple, very straightforward. Why the heck should I network? Why should I bother? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's not something that a lot of us necessarily want to do. It's something we have to push ourselves to do. So why in the world should I network? Curious about your thoughts around that. So if you could just go to the chat box and share your thoughts. Why should I network? And I will tell you, that it is more than just I should network to find a job. That's the most common response that I get. I'm networking because I want to find a job. And certainly that's one reason, and a reason why a lot of people network, but it's certainly more than that. We're getting some good responses here. Danielle says jobs, absolutely. And she also says resources. And I think that is a wonderful response. Thank you for that, Danielle, because truly, if you are net worthing, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it is about resources and finding resources and sharing resources. Amanda says, this is really good. Find people with similar interests, potential collaborators. And if you think about this long-term approach, this is an opportunity to find people who will be interested in working with you long-term and perhaps collaborating. Rita Hoover says collective brain. I love that. Carolyn says, stay engaged with colleagues. Absolutely. And that is so hard sometimes when you get into a really, really busy environment, but particularly if you are in an environment where you don't get a lot of exposure to colleagues outside of your organization, it is a great way to stay engaged. Camilla says, can be helpful to learn about other resources from different people. Absolutely. Danielle says projects. Absolutely. And Priya, I love this. This is so well said. You can find people who are passionate about the same issues. And boy, is that important as you build your network. So I think those are all fantastic strategies and ideas for why you would want to network. I have a few other ones that I want to share with you. So let's take a look at a few of my thoughts around this. And first of all, I think it enhances your communication skills. And in connection with that can really enhance your interviewing skills, especially if you go through the process of networking meetings that we're going to talk about a little bit later this afternoon, really can enhance both your communication and your interviewing skills. As a couple people have said, it really can give you some exposure to some new and different ideas, new resources, different resources for sure. I have often used my network to get advice. Maybe I am facing some kind of really difficult or challenging issue or problem, or maybe someone in my network is facing a substantial issue or problem. What a great time to go out to your network and get help from them, or provide help to people in your network by getting or giving advice. I think that's a wonderful strategy. Certainly related to that, recommendations for how you may deal with certain issues, and perhaps even going as far as recommendations, if you need recommendations when you are going through that job search process. If you do have a strong network established, that will really help. And this is the biggest one for me, folks, making new professional friends. And I will tell you that that is the biggest benefit that I have found from networking over the years. I've really been fortunate enough to build a very strong professional network. And I've met all of these wonderful people who have become both professional and in some cases personal friends who I never would have met, never would have had contact with otherwise. So for me, this is just a very strong reason for networking. And then in terms of those of you who may be going through a job search, I have a very interesting statistic to share with you. And that is networking is the source for about 75% of successful job searches. And this is based on data from the Virginia Employment Commission. I happen to live in Virginia, so I access their resources periodically. And they do a survey on an annual basis about how people find their next job. And year to year, it's pretty static that about 75% find their next job through some sort of professional or personal networking contact. So isn't that interesting? And certainly a very good reason for networking. So you've outlined a number of really good reasons. These are a few more good reasons. There's just no doubt that you should be actively putting some effort into networking. No doubt whatever in my mind. So let's go the next step and let's talk a little bit about the process. And the next question I have for you is I'd love to get your thoughts about where do I network? And this could be networking in person, this could be networking virtually, whatever your preference is. But where do you think you could potentially go to network? If you could again go to the chat box and share your thoughts with me about where you can go to network. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, y'all have a great opportunity for those of you who will be going to New Orleans in a few weeks. That's a wonderful opportunity. But there are a number of other resources for networking. And so we've got some good responses coming in. Thank you for these. Danielle says scientific sessions. Amanda says conferences, absolutely. Danielle, also online professional groups. We'll talk a little bit about online. In this age of COVID, online networking has become even more important than it was in the past. Camilla says continuing education events or meetings, professional organizations, absolutely. Online, social media. Priya, thank you. In your workplace, why not have a strong professional network in your workplace? And certainly with people who do what you do, but maybe with people who are in related types of professions can really help to build. Rita says conferences, professional meetings, academic events, absolutely. And Amanda says online webinars. Yes, all of those are absolutely true. So let's take a look at some, first of all, some in-person networking scenarios. The event in New Orleans is coming up on June 3rd. We are beginning to actually get out and see people in person again, which is a wonderful thing. So here are some in-person networking scenarios you might want to think about. And you've already identified several of these: career conferences, business related meetings, etc., professional acquaintances. I would also like to suggest to you that sometimes great contacts come through resources you didn't necessarily expect. So on this list, I actually have personal friends and acquaintances, and I also have everyday life opportunities, and the two kind of go hand in hand. And I'll tell you a quick story around that. I was working with a client several years ago, and she was going through a rather difficult scenario. She had lost her job. Unfortunately, her organization had gone bankrupt, which was not a good thing. And so she didn't have a lot of resources and was using her professional network, but also I said to her, why don't you reach out to people who you meet in everyday life, people you know in everyday life? You may be surprised by who knows whom. And so she took my advice, and this, I swear to you, this is a true story. People don't believe this. She went to get her hair cut. She went to the woman who cut her hair, who'd been cutting her hair for many years. And as her hair was being cut, they were chatting, and she was telling the woman cutting her hair about what had happened. And she decided to just share more details than she had in the past about what she did, what her skills were, what her qualifications were. She kind of gave this verbal resume to this woman cutting her hair. And, you know, people who cut hair know a lot of people. And so the person cutting her hair said to her, you know, I think I have another client who does something very, very similar to what you do. And she said, I think I should hook you two up. And she did. She hooked them up, and lo and behold, they became very strong professional friends. They became very, very strong professional friends. They are to this day. They help each other out, provide advice, all the reasons we've talked about for networking, and all because she went to get her haircut. So there you go. You just never know. I also want to suggest, if you are trying to network with people who you haven't met before, personal referrals are really, really helpful. And let's say you are contacting someone to do an informational meeting, like we'll be talking about in a few minutes. if you have a personal referral, it really makes the process so much easier. And so it's going to people who are in your personal and professional network and telling them, I want to expand my network. I want to meet more people who are doing what I'm doing. I really feel that we could benefit each other. Do you know other people who are doing what I do? And those personal referrals just make a big difference when you are trying to make contact with someone for the very first time. So referrals, big, big deal in these in-person networking scenarios. So you've identified several, and there are a few more here. But as we all know, virtual networking has become even more important in the last 2.5 years than it was prior to COVID. We were doing some virtual networking before COVID, but particularly over the last 2 years, it's become so incredibly important. So let's talk a little bit about some virtual networking scenarios. So take a look at some of these. So the very first bullet on this slide, I think, is by far the most important. And you'll notice it says use the appropriate virtual platform. Of course, the best known is LinkedIn, and many of us are probably on LinkedIn. You'll find me on LinkedIn. There are other professional networking platforms out there in addition to LinkedIn. But I would suggest to you that a social personal platform, something like Facebook, is not your best resource if you were going to try to network professionally. That's more of a personal social networking resource that's not going to be as effective. So I would really encourage you to use the appropriate virtual platform. Now, I mentioned LinkedIn. That happens to be the one that I use primarily. And I've gotten some pushback about using LinkedIn from clients. And the pushback is, I don't want to put all that information out there about myself where anyone can see it. There are things like identity theft going on. I may not want the entire world to see all this information about me. And so I don't think this is something I want to do. And I've had clients who have straight out refused. I'm not going to do that. I don't want that information out there. No, not happening. So, and some of you may feel that way, and certainly there's validity in that. You know, there's so much going on in terms of identity theft and people finding out things you really would prefer they not know, you know, people who you don't want to know things, finding out things. So you really have to weigh the advantages and the disadvantages and make a personal decision about that. I will tell you that my strong personal preference is to have a strong profile on a virtual platform, virtual business platform like LinkedIn. I think that's very important. If you do get onto a virtual network or more than one virtual network, a very good strategy is to look for virtual groups that match your interests. If you go to LinkedIn, for example, you can do a search for virtual groups, and you'll find there are probably literally thousands on LinkedIn. And so this does not mean join every virtual group you can find. You don't want to do that. But select a handful, select maybe 4 or 5 that really are related to your interests, and people are in the virtual group who really share your interests, their interests match your interests. And those are the ones to concentrate on. Go for quality rather than quantity, just maybe 3, 4, or 5 at most. And then when you get involved in those virtual groups, be prepared to contribute and share. Don't be a lurker, because you know, people won't get to know you. You really won't have an opportunity to network. But if you contribute and share in one of those virtual groups, that's really an opportunity to start that virtual network and start that virtual networking. So it's really important. And certainly be honest and authentic. We've probably all heard the terminology catfishing, which is used in social networking, but I have found that happens in professional virtual networking as well. I've come across a couple people who just weren't who they said they were. And there's that word, authentic again. You really want to be honest and authentic. So as you think about both in-person networking and virtual networking, just a few strategies around that. And after this next slide, I'm going to pause for a moment and see what questions y'all have at this point. So be thinking about questions you have so far. But some networking strategies. Prepare ahead, be prepared. That's certainly important. You want to think about what is it I want to do with this network as I build this network and engage in this network. What is it I want to achieve with that? What are my goals for that? And really do some preparation and think ahead. What is it I want to achieve and be prepared? The second bullet, I think, is by far the most important on this slide. It says, give, don't just take. And this relates to the net worthing process that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. It should be a two-way process. And if you are just taking, then you really are the kind of person my brother didn't want to become. You really are using people for your own purposes. And that's not authentic networking. So think about a two-way strategy. You want to give, you don't want to just take. And that means that you're going to volunteer information to people. You're going to share resources with people. One of my favorite things to do is when I see a fantastic article somewhere online, and I know there are various people in my network, or perhaps in a group that I belong to, who will really benefit, will really see value, I'll share that article because I want other people to get the benefit that I have achieved. And people really, really appreciate that. And it really helps you to build that two-way process. Down towards the bottom, it says, maintain communication with new contacts. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I have experienced this scenario a couple of times. I meet someone, perhaps at a professional meeting. We have a wonderful conversation. I think, wow, wouldn't they be a wonderful person to have as an ongoing contact as part of my network? And we have that one initial wonderful conversation, and they drop off the face of the earth. Never hear from them again. And someone just told them, oh, you need to go to a meeting and you need to talk to people, but there's no follow-up. And that's certainly no way to build a network. So you want to maintain and build communication. And finally, as you think about this whole process, networking in person as well as virtual networking, think about your time constraints. And what are the best uses of your time? You cannot be everywhere at once. You can't be in every virtual group that you might think you want to be in. You have to pick and choose carefully. If you went to every professional meeting available to you, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, I'd probably be at a meeting every night of the week if I went to all the groups that I might potentially have interest in. So you really have to evaluate what is the best use of my time and make sure that you're getting the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, from the virtual and personal networks that you're building. So I want to pause for just a moment and see what questions you have. And there is one question here in the Q&A box that I've just opened. And oh, this is a good one. Thank you, Rita. What is the best way to start networking again with people that you were in touch with a long time ago? Thank you for that question, because I think that happens to all of us. We have the best intentions in the world, but people just fall off our radar. And this really, I think, comes under the heading of authentic networking. If I want to try to open up that line of communication again, I'm going to reach out to that person and I'm going to be very authentic. You know, I just let the ball drop. I really intended to stay in contact with you. I haven't done a good job with that. I'd really like to reestablish contact. Can I take you out for coffee? Can I take you to breakfast? Can I take you to lunch? I'd love to have a conversation and just reopen those lines of communication again. And so I think just admitting that you were not as good with your follow-up as you should have been, being very open and honest about that, and then being very transparent. Hey, I really want to get this relationship going again. I think that's a great way to handle that kind of scenario. So thank you very much for that question. I think that's something that happens to a lot of us. Any other questions? Feel free. Oh, here, Rita says, thank you. You're welcome. Any other questions? Feel free to put them either in the Q&A or in the chat box. I can see them in either place. Give you a moment if you have any others. And I don't see any others at this point, so we'll keep moving along. We will have a few minutes for Q&A at the end of the hour. So if you do have other questions as we move along, please jot them down or put them in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and we will make sure to get to them at the end of the hour. So one final thing about overall networking strategies, and that is, what if I am an introvert? So Myers-Briggs introvert does not necessarily mean that you're shy. Those of you who are familiar with Myers-Briggs know that it is about where your energy comes from. I am a Myers-Briggs introvert. My energy comes from within. So if I go to a professional meeting of some type, it is absolutely exhausting for me. So I want to share some strategies for introverts, because I think there are a lot of people who share my exhaustion when they're faced with that kind of scenario. So here are a few ideas for introverts around going to some of these in-person networking events. Take a look at these. So a couple of things about this slide. People are often surprised that it says arrive early. I used to have a strategy of arriving as late as I possibly could and leaving as early as I possibly could, because I just didn't want to spend a lot of time. But if you arrive late, or if you arrive well after a lot of other people, they've already gotten into their little groups, they're already having conversations, and it's much harder to strike up a conversation when everybody's already in their little groups. So I think arriving early is a really good strategy. I think it's really important, if you're an introvert, to go with a goal in mind. I need a purpose. If people used to tell me, oh, go to this event and talk to people and you'll meet people and it'll be great and blah, blah, blah. And it was so hard for me. And then someone gave me this strategy: have a goal in mind. Maybe there's something going on in your field that is particularly noteworthy or interesting. You want to find out what other people think. Maybe you're facing some kind of professional challenge and you would love to get advice, find out what people think about it. So I go basically with a question I want answered, and notice it says ask questions on the slide. I go with a question that I want answered, and that really gives me purpose for being there, and it makes it much, much easier to get a conversation started. So I go with a goal in mind, usually with a question that I want to ask people, and then I use that question to start conversations, and I find that that just works really well. Don't feel like you have to talk to everybody. Go for quality, not quantity. If you talk with 2 or 3 really interesting people and make 2 or 3 good contacts, that's great. That's all you really need to do. And you'll notice it says take time out if needed, and that surprises a lot of people. But I get exhausted at these events, and I sometimes just need to leave the room for 3 or 4 minutes, find a quiet place to just sit, gather my thoughts, get my energy back, and then I can go back in and continue. And I sometimes get pushback on that, and the pushback is, well, you're trying to escape. And it's not that I'm escaping, it's just that I have to preserve my energy. My energy comes from within, and other people drain my energy. So I just need to step out, build my energy back up, build my internal resources back up. Then I can go back into that room and be very, very effective. So I think all these strategies are very, very helpful for introverts and something to think about. I've mentioned something called net worthing repeatedly so far today. And so I want to share that strategy and that whole idea with you and tell you a little bit about what that's about and how it's different than traditional networking. So what I want to tell you about is something called net worthing. And the basic tenets behind net worthing are, number one, there is a focus on we as opposed to me. How can we help each other? I am developing a network because we all want to find worth in each other. We can share resources, we can share ideas, we can share contacts, but it's about we rather than me. Second tenet is an abundance mentality. Rather than a mentality of, oh, there are only so many clients out there, or jobs are rare, or there may not be enough business to go around. An abundance mentality, there's going to be enough business, there will be enough clients, there are going to be multiple jobs out there. And if we help each other and focus on we rather than me, we're also focusing on that mentality of abundance. So I really like that. And finally, a concentration on the long term. And we've already talked about this a little bit. It's not about, I'm going to go out and network and use people to find a job and then drop them all. It is, I am building long-term enduring relationships. And that's what is really important about this. So net worthing, focus on we, an abundance mentality, concentration on the long term, building those enduring relationships, versus a more traditional concept of networking. And this is the traditional concept my brother had in his head. And that is focus on me. I need people to help me, me. I'll get this job, they'll help me, then I'll drop them like a hot potato. It's a very competitive world out there. I cannot share anything with anyone else because they'll take it away from me. They'll take advantage of me. And finally, short term, I'm going to use you. I'm going to find that next job. Then boom, your history. I'm done with you. And I've just used you to reach my goal of finding a job. That is why so many people have a negative connotation. And that is kind of a traditional focus rather than this focus that I really like on net worthing. Focus on we, an abundance mentality, and long-term enduring relationships. Love that term, net worthing. I think that's a great term. So that's a little bit around net worthing versus traditional networking. And next place I want to go with you for the next couple of minutes is to talk a little bit about something called informational meetings. And this is a really strong strategy to building your network and building the ability to net worth with a variety of people. So let's talk a little bit about what is an informational meeting. And you may have heard the terminology informational interview. We used to call these informational interviews in the old days. But what I found personally as a career coach was that when I called something an informational interview, the word interview got into people's heads and they would go out and do these things, have these meetings, but treat them as a job interview, which was not authentic and not ethical. And so I'm now using the terminology informational meeting rather than interview because it is a meeting to gain information. So first of all, let's define what an informational meeting is. So take a look at this. These are some of the things an informational meeting would be for. And I think all of these are pretty self-explanatory. You want to learn more about your career field and what career paths might be open. You may want to find out more about a particular organization that you're really, really interested in. What does it take to succeed in this field? What are the professional requirements? What are the certifications? And I'm going to show you a bunch of questions around this in just a moment. But what an informational meeting is not is this. It's not a job interview in disguise. That is why I am calling it an informational meeting now, rather than an informational interview. And it's not about you. It's not about discussing you and your qualifications. It's about getting more information that will help to build your knowledge about your field, your career, possible career paths, where your career might go. So it's not about you. So some guidelines around informational meetings would be, number one, if you can possibly get a referral, if someone you know can say, hey, I know John Jones. I think that John Jones would be a terrific person for you to talk with. Give him a call. Here's his number. Tell him I referred you. That'll get you in the door a whole lot faster. So personal referrals are really important. And then the other parts of the slide really go together. You want to figure out why you're having that meeting. What information do you want to get? What are your goals? And then you want to plan your questions accordingly so that you meet your goals for that meeting. You're able to share whatever it is you want to share and get the information you need. And you want to be sure you're using your time effectively, because certainly everyone is so busy. And if someone is consented to give you a half hour, you don't want to take an hour. That's not ethical, not authentic, not being respectful of other people's time. So this may all sound like common sense, but I'll tell you a quick personal story around this and how I didn't really understand the importance of knowing my goals, preparing ahead, et cetera. When I was getting out of grad school many years ago, I went to grad school in Rochester, New York. And the largest corporate employer, I was looking for a corporate human resources position. The largest corporate employer was Eastman Kodak. And through a personal referral, I was able to get an informational meeting with the vice president of human resources at Eastman Kodak. And I thought, fantastic, I've got it made. And I put on the one suit that I owned and my one white shirt and my one tie, and I drove myself to Eastman Kodak. I was ushered into this guy's office, and he looked at me and he said, so what can I do for you today? And there was silence. And I thought, oh my gosh, I had not prepared at all. And I think I babbled something about, well, I want to find out more about what's going on at Kodak, or some ridiculous babble like that. But to make a long story short, he was very polite. But I was ushered out of his office about 10 to 15 minutes after I had been ushered into his office, because I simply was not prepared. So that's really, really critical. So let's talk briefly about some possible informational meeting questions. And I would suggest to you, first of all, you're probing for information about the career field, about the organization, the things we talked about previously. And you certainly want them to be open-ended questions, not questions that can be answered with a yes or a no, because you are trying to get a conversation going. And a closed-ended question will not get a conversation going. So some open-ended questions. And I'm just curious, I'm sure some of you have done informational meetings at some point in the past. What do you think some potential informational meeting questions might be? I'm just curious about what your thoughts are around what some informational meeting questions might be. Think about that. Go to the chat box if you could. And what sorts of things do you think you might ask during an informational meeting? As you're putting your answers in, I can tell you that one thing I like to do is to ask people about their own career paths, where they came from, how they got to where they're going, how they started out in the field. Because I'm a career coach, I find that fascinating anyway. But I find that that really helps to get people talking about themselves, and really gets the conversation going, because people tend to love to talk about what their career path has been and where they came from. So I find that's one avenue that works really well. And I'm not getting a whole lot of responses this time. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move ahead and share with you what I think are some really good informational meeting questions. So let's take a look at a couple of lists. First of all, take a look at this. First of all, how did you get into the career field? How did you get to your current position? We just talked about that. I like to ask about change because there's so much change going on in a huge variety of career fields these days. So what's happening in terms of change with your organization and your profession? Love this one. What do you like about your organization? And also, what do you like about your profession? What do you like about what you do? What do you like about where you do it? That's a real positive one. But I also like to ask again about change. If you could change anything about your profession, what would it be? If you could change anything about your organization, what might that be? I find that I get some really valuable information that way. And then a few more questions that I think are really very helpful for an informational meeting. Love to ask people about their challenges. That tells me a lot about what's going on within a career field, about what's going on within an organization. And people tend to like to talk about what some of the challenges are that they're facing. I want to know also what it takes to succeed. And so I'll ask about skill sets. What are some of the skill sets that you really feel are important within your profession, your field of work, and also within your organization? And finally, I love this because people tend to like to give advice. And so this is usually my closing question during an informational meeting. What advice would you give someone interested in the field? What advice would you give someone interested in your organization? People tend to love to give advice. And so that's usually how I close an informational meeting. So these are just some good open-ended questions. I'm sure that you can come up with others depending on what you're hoping to accomplish, but this gives you an idea of what some good potential informational meeting questions might look like. So we're going to start to close out. We're getting rapidly towards the end of our hour together. So first of all, I want to summarize where we've been. And here is what we have accomplished over the last hour or so. We've talked about the whole concept of authentic networking and why that word authentic is so important. We took a look at some networking strategies, how you actually go about networking, both in person as well as virtually. Talked about net worthing and the difference between net worthing and traditional networking. And we just spent a few minutes talking about informational meeting strategies and some questions you might possibly use during an informational meeting. So I'd like to close this out with a few minutes for Q&A. And I think we have one additional question here in the Q&A box that has come in from Amanda. She wants to know what's the best way to start communication with someone well-known in the field. I feel like I'm still young in my career and a nobody. Thank you for that question, Amanda. Boy, do I remember that feeling. And I remember feeling that way when I walked into the office of the Vice President of Human Resources at Eastman Kodak. And so I think one of the best ways to start communication is to try to get a referral. If you can possibly get a referral to someone who you do want to build a network with, that gives you some credibility right out of the gate. So I think that's really important. And I think, again, being prepared, if you are going to have a meeting with this individual, or even if you're going to network virtually with this individual, having a purpose and really having thought through what are some of the ways that this person's information would be really useful. And then, even though I'm still nobody, do I have an article? Do I have something I can offer this person based on what I know about them and about their background that that might be helpful to them? So we're making it a two-way process as much as possible. But Amanda, I've been there. I've felt that pain, believe me. And so I think those are some of my strategies around that sort of scenario. So I would invite any additional questions from anyone, either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. And I see my moderator has returned. I don't know whether you've gotten any questions while we were going through the afternoon.
And that was a wonderful presentation. I guess just as a final question, as we're nearing ADA coming up next month, you had some wonderful tips and advice. If you had to narrow it down to maybe the 2 or 3 top pieces of advice while we go and network, what would they be?
Oh, I think that, thank you for that question. What a wonderful question. So a couple of things. Number one, if you are going into some individual sessions, if you're going to a session, as a listener, as a spectator, arrive a little bit early and start a conversation with the person sitting next to you. And you can start a conversation about whatever the topic of the session is. And that's just a good way to meet someone in kind of a less stressful way, because it's much more one-on-one. So use those opportunities. And I guess the other big thing would be if you go to some kind of networking session, and I know sometimes there are networking happy hours and those kinds of opportunities at these meetings, I'd strongly urge you to, again, go with a question that you need answered. Don't just go thinking, I'm going to stand around and we'll have a glass of wine and we'll smile and chit chat. That really won't really accomplish a whole lot. But think about a question related to your field that you really want to discuss and get some answers to, and go prepared with that question. I really think that makes those scenarios much, much easier.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, and we're almost to the end of the hour. So let me just say thank you to everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. Thanks for your good questions. And I'll turn things back over to my moderator.
All right, thank you so much. This concludes our session today. Again, we would really like to thank Mr. DeBack for such a wonderful presentation. Thank you also to the Leona B and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust for their support for today's program. And I also want to thank each of you for joining us and for your wonderful questions and participation for our Focus on Fellows Early Career Webinar Series. So again, this concludes our program today. We look forward to seeing you all at the ADA's 82nd Scientific Sessions in New Orleans. And thank you again for your time. And we look forward to connecting with you at the next Focus on Fellows program.